the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to be with Scott Hendrix. Scott, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Absolutely. Alison, thank you for having me today. I was born in Germany. My dad was in the service. He retired soon after that. And afterwards, we came back to Mississippi, where I have lived ever since. Both my parents were from the state. Went to school here, graduated from Mississippi State University. Have a wife and two grown children. My daughter is out supporting herself, which is fantastic. My son will be graduating, hopefully, from Mississippi State next semester. And he is going into the ministry. And I seriously started writing about 4 years ago. I finished my first novel then. Finished a sequel after that, my first novel being The Garden Spot, the sequel being The Resting Spot. And I'm currently working on a third novel now that I'm calling What Dwells Below. That may change later on, but that's the title now.
All right. Well, I happen to have a dog graduate, went to Mississippi State, graduated in...
Is that right?
He did. He graduated in 2020, in the fall of 2020. So
wow.
He was able to have we had a full-on graduation.
Yeah.
But they had broken it up into, I think, 7 different times. And then we would, as your graduate walked the stage, then you walked out with them. So
that's great.
His last name was towards the end of the alphabet, so we got to see most of everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Well, tell them go dogs.
Go dogs. That's right. Let's go. Here's a funny story of how he got there. So he was my hands-off kid. So we have my husband and I together have 4, and he was the baby. And it was like by the time he came around, I just would hand him a credit card and say, the SATs are coming up. So if you want to go to college, here's the credit card. And then, applications are going to be due soon. So if you want to apply somewhere, just let me know. Here's the credit card. Yeah. And he found 2 schools that he really liked. And he chose Mississippi State because while he was from Florida, they offered him in-state tuition because his father was had been a 100% disabled veteran. And so they really, really support the veterans. And that was my favorite thing. And then I thought, what a smart decision for him. So.
Wow. Yeah. That's fantastic. You told me something I didn't know there. That's great.
Yeah. They, and it was special. He had like special status. So he had the equivalent of veteran status. So he got to pick all his classes first.
Oh, wow. Man, it just keeps getting better, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And what a pretty campus.
Yeah. Oh, it's gorgeous, man. There's so many fantastic things about Mississippi State University. It's a special place.
Tell me about your first, you said they were books, right? But you also are into movies or?
Well, yeah, I've written 2 novels so far. And Alison, the whole time that I was writing this first book, The Garden Spot, I just kept seeing scenes from a movie as I was writing. And it's kind of turned out to be that's how I write now. But I was doing that, and I realized along the way as I was writing that I should get out some 3x5 note cards and just make scene notes on them as I went. And when I got through with the novel, I went back and wrote a screenplay from those index cards. I call it a screenplay. If someone looked at it who writes screenplays, they might not call it that, but but I have written a screenplay, read a book or 2 about how to do it, and have written that, and so that's something I'm trying to get in the hands of someone who can do something with it. Currently looking for an agent, so we'll see what happens there.
So what is your writing process?
I work full time. I love to get up early in the morning and write. I love to, sometimes when the mood strikes and it's late at night, if I'm not too tired, I write then. But I really have to feel it to write it. I can't just sit down and force it out. I've done that before, tried it, and it doesn't look good on the page after that's done. But I've heard someone say before that you do a lot of writing in your mind and in your planning and that sort of thing. So when I've been working on these books, I'm constantly thinking about what's going to happen in the next scene, what I'm trying to get to and work toward that end. So, and I've heard people say that that's writing as well. So I do a lot of marinating of the story, I guess you could say, in my mind.
All right, marinating. What a great term. That's exactly what it is. That's the best part about being a writer, by the way, is like people will say, well, what are you, you're just staring at the clouds. You're not doing anything. You're like, no, I'm being creative. I'm letting the process work.
Yeah. Doing a lot of thinking. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of thinking and plotting and planning.
One of these days, I swear, one of these days, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to write at least a page a day, and it just doesn't happen. Although I do a lot of writing. It just, a lot of it is not necessarily the creative, moving my my work in progress forward. It's all for other stuff.
Oh yeah. Maybe one day when I retire, I'll be able to do that, but right now, cannot do it. But yeah, there are times on the weekends I can sit down and really get in a good groove and sit there for several hours and get a lot of pages written. But those times are few and far between.
So it sounds to me like your books are all connected. They're a series?
They are not a series. The Garden Spot was the first book. The Resting Spot is a sequel. After I had written The Garden Spot, I had a pretty good response from it and had a lot of people say, hey, I want to see what happens next. So The Resting Spot picks up 16 years later. I tell you, I personally don't like, I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't like to read sequels. And the only reason is because I don't know how many times I've picked up a book and gotten into it and then found out that it's the third book in a series. And now I got to go back and read 1 and 2, and that's fine. But it just, the whole time you're reading them, you're thinking, man, I'm missing something here, But this third novel that I'm working on is completely separate from the first two.
And what is it? Well, tell me what they're all about. Because, okay, so you have The Garden Spot and The Resting Spot. I could go anywhere in my imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. The Garden Spot is set in a small southern town at a small southern golf course. It's not about golf. The main character just happens to be a young golf prodigy. It's really a book about family dynamics and about how not everybody grows up like Leave It to Beaver in our world. And it's really rough. I was actually at a golf tournament years and years ago. I started that book 30 years ago and put it down and started raising children and working. And about 4 years ago, I picked it back up and really got serious about it. But I was at a golf tournament one night in the men's room, and there was this young kid in there, and he was crying. And while I was in there, his father came in there and just berated him. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing because this kid was leading the tournament. This young teenage kid was leading the tournament, beating all these old guys. And I said, man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I had to witness that. And he said, man, it just never ends. He's never happy with anything that I do. And that whole scene there just kind of spurned this idea and in me, and I just kind of wanted to explore that. And so that was the beginning of The Garden Spot. And it's just a story about this young boy who's a golf prodigy. His father is a terrible, raging alcoholic who has bouts of, oh, I'm so sorry I've done this to you, but then I'll never drink again. But then he turns around and drinks again and abuses him and his mother. His mother, because of that, was a former beauty queen at one of our local universities in Mississippi. But to support her family, she's had to turn to prostitution. And she was forced into that by their wonderful husband and father. So the book is about that relationship. And then this boy, they have to run from something that the mother has done in Mississippi, or on the southern Mississippi. They get back to her hometown, and the kid on the golf course one day and runs into this old man who becomes his mentor and savior, basically. The resting spot picks up 16 years later, and I can't really tell you a lot about that because it'll give too much away about what happened at the end of the garden spot and what happened eventually in the resting spot. But the third novel is a complete departure from that. So yeah, completely different book there.
I grew up a swimmer, and there were all those swimmer parents. We'd all sit around having these giant invitationals, and they would have everybody from all sorts of schools that would be there, and all the swimmers would be hanging out, and we'd have a great time, and it'd always be the ones that were the very best.
Yeah.
Right. Not okay. Always is the sweeping generalization, but it seemed like the ones that were the very best, their parents were also the meanest. And I always felt sad for those children because it's not worth, it was like, it's not worth that. It's, eventually you're going to have a life. And so even as a young person, I recognized that was not the way to raise a family. And I'm glad for the upbringing I did have. Small town Pennsylvania. We have our own things, but
right.
It sounds really interesting, and those family dynamics are so relatable. No matter when you started, even if it was 30 years ago, the dynamics just doesn't change. So you started 30 years ago, then you picked it up 4 years ago.
Right.
That's an amazing. See, were you ruminating that whole time and just building the plot?
It kept coming back to me and just never would leave me. That scene that I witnessed in the men's room that night it still never has left me. And I think about it still today, but I certainly still thought about it over those years. And of course about the book as well. And, once in a blue moon over that 30-year course of time, I would go back and make a note here and there and kind of keep it going. But, I about 4 years ago when I started this thing again, I picked up that old manuscript and I said, this is ridiculous. You've always wanted to be a writer. You always want to write. I'm constantly saying, hey, somebody ought to write a book about that. And here you are with what I think is a great idea, and you're not doing it. So I just kind of had to get myself off my rear end and get to work, and since that time, I really, when I got serious about it, really sat down and did it. I love the process from beginning to end. Learned an awful lot. I don't know how many times I wrote and rewrote that thing. I had 2 garbage bags. I felt like I had to print off each copy and physically make the notes on there to edit it. And I literally have 2 garbage bags full of those manuscripts where I've done that. But it was a good learning experience. It taught me it just takes a lot of work, So, but yeah, I had just been thinking about that whole period of time. Absolutely.
So you moved quickly then onto that next book.
I did, yeah. Like I said, I had some really good response. I didn't know what people were going to think of it. It's a tough book. The ending is tough. It's not a feel-good book at all. It's based in some really dark realities of what our lives are like. And but yeah, I moved on to the second book because I had such a great response. I had so many people asking for it, and I had not even thought about that. I had not even thought about a sequel. But when I realized what the hook could be and what the plot could be and how that all could tie into the first book, I thought, that's not bad. So I immediately picked it up and started writing the second book and completed it within about a year, the same amount of time when I really, really got serious about finishing the book and editing it and everything. I was able to do that much quicker because you learn so much through the process. So finished the second book in about that period of time. Yes.
Well, Scott Hendrix, how can people find out more about your books and what you're up to?
Yeah, I've got a website that I just created. It's under construction, as they say. It is scottdavishendrix.com. I've started using my middle name because I realized that there was a Scott Hendrix who wrote a book called The Garden Spot. So I had a lot of people trying to find me, and they found this other guy. So scottdavishendrix.com, my Instagram page and my Facebook are both Scott Davis Hendrix. So if you just type that in, you can easily find me there.
All right. So there is another person with your name who wrote a book with the same title.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually about gardening. So
that's just insane. The universe does some interesting things.
It really does. It really does. It really does. Yeah, The Garden Spot was an interesting name. I kept trying to come up with a good name, and I didn't realize that the Garden Spot was actually a golf term. When I was writing this, I just found that out later. But of course, the garden spot means an actual garden spot where someone planted beans and peas and corn at one time, also. So there's a double meaning there in the name.
Well, Scott, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Absolutely.
Do you have a lot of sticky notes on your desk?
I'm looking at 2 right now. Actually 3, I'm sorry.
And do you keep old trophies?
I do not. That's something I never have. I've had a couple of trophies in my lifetime, but not just a whole lot. But I'm not a pack rat. I don't keep things. I tend to throw them away pretty quickly. Don't like clutter.
Final question. Pen, pencil, or keyboard?
Keyboard. A lot faster to type. But I tell you, even after I print it out, I do have that pen in my hand and make corrections with a pen. So much easier that way for me.
I agree with you. I read slow, I type fast.
Yeah.
So it's easier for me to make corrections on a hard copy than it is on the computer. But as a professor, I try to save as many trees as possible. So I correct. Yeah. I don't always print them out. I did have jury duty last week, and I printed out about 60 essays and took them with me. So that
wow.
hours just sitting there waiting to find out if you've been selected. But I'll have you all know that I was selected, but the case was dismissed before I was even had to do anything. So.
Oh, thank goodness.
I got out of that one. Scott Davis Hendrix, thank you so much for stopping by.
Alison, thank you. I appreciate the time and I appreciate being on your podcast. Can you edit that? I blanked out.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. We're all done.
Awesome. Alison, thank you so much.
Scott Davis Hendrix is a lifelong resident of Louisville, Mississippi. He and his wife, Nora Gay, have 2 children, Sydney Louise, who lives in Oxford, Mississippi, and Hoyt Davis, who is a senior at Mississippi State University. Scott attended Louisville High School and graduated from Mississippi State University with a BA in communication. The Garden Spot is his first novel, set in the fictional town of Lewiston, Mississippi. The Garden Spot was published in April of 2022 and has been listed in top 10 reads in Mississippi. His second novel is The Resting Spot and is a sequel to The Garden Spot. Follow Scott on social media or at his website at Scott Davis Hendrix. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us at floridawriters.org. Until next time.